Building and Construction Minister Chris Penk is on a mission to lower the cost of building a house. To explain how the government intends doing that, he joins me now. Well, let's first start. I mean, you've got more up-to-date figures. We're about 50% more expensive than in Australia?
Yeah, like many things, it's more expensive to do it in New Zealand, about 50% extra, as you've said. And when we think about the cost of building a house and the cost of buying a house and the cost of living, that's encouraging people to leave New Zealand and go to Australia. We've got to be much more competitive than that.
Has it got worse, that differential? Or
Yeah, certainly the cost of building in New Zealand has increased a lot, so 41% since 2019. So that's a pre-COVID figure. And obviously there's a lot that's happened in the world since then, and there are some difficulties that are external to a domestic government, but there are things within our power to change about that. So we've got to get that back under control.
so what are you going to do then?
Well, there are a number of different points in the system that we can make a difference. So we've talked about streamlining the building consent process, the whole system overall, but also there are some moves we can make in relation to the products that are used. So overseas products, for example, that people find difficult to use in New Zealand because they've got to be consented by one of the local councils, and there are 67 different authorities with 67 different interpretations of the standard in this country. And so for that reason, often it's just all too hard, too expensive, too uncertain to try and get that product from overseas and use in New Zealand. And of course, without that competition and opening up to the whole world's worth of innovative products, sometimes cheaper products, but still good quality products that we want, we're missing out.
So what, will you just introduce some sort of uniform system then? If it gets approved sort of centrally, then it just should apply across the country?
Yeah, well, we want there to be clarity and consistency between the New Zealand building consent authorities, but also we say that if overseas jurisdictions are already using a product that they've decided in a reasonable way, if we're talking about a credible comparable country, for example, it might be Australia that we say, in a schedule or in regulations that enables, their people to use these products, then we've got to work pretty hard to try and justify why that shouldn't be the case in New Zealand. So that's our starting point, and that's the detailed policy work we're doing at the moment.
I mean, the Commerce Commission did that study, right? Market study into, have you picked up anything from that?
Yeah, the Commerce Commission has had something to say about that from the anti-competitive angle. I think it's not necessarily the case, or just the case, that there are those in New Zealand who have got a financial incentive to keep others out. It's more that we need to proactively understand what risk is being faced by building consent authorities. You think about if you're a council and you're trying to avoid ratepayers being in the gun for a legal challenge if they were to approve something that proved to be unsuitable.
Well, I suppose we all think of leaky homes.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's the classic case. So we've got to be careful that we do this in a sensible way, but at the same time, there is a balance to be struck here, and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and allow, or introduce the possibility of problems later down the track. But of course, there are sensible ways we can mitigate that, and one of them is to say, well, if there are approvals by equivalent countries, and if there aren't good reasons to preclude them, then we should flip it around and say, well, that could be a policy response to say that we'll much more readily allow those overseas products to be used here.
What about the structure of the industry itself? And I think of building companies, and I think Productivity Commission in previous reports has noted just how many small building companies, often one-person sort of companies really, and that you don't get the economies of scale. But I think at the same time, the government you're doing away with the construction accord, aren't you?
No. What we've said is we will stop, and indeed we have stopped, work that was started under the last government's industry transformation plans. There are some work projects that were sort of halfway through that we've allowed to continue to run through, but no more new ones will be embarked upon. But the construction sector accord actually predated the last government, and there is some valuable work that it's done in engaging with the sector, because of course the danger is if you sit in Wellington and aren't aware of all the issues being faced by industry on the ground throughout New Zealand, then you lose touch. So we do need a vehicle for engaging with the sector. Construction sector accord has done some good work along those lines, so we're looking exactly what that looks like going forward, but it's been retained, at least for now, in some form.
But do you see any potential for improving the sector around how it's organised? Can it be made more competitive? Can we get economies of scale? And for instance, there's also been a lot of talk about prefabricated building, sort of the factory building. can that sort of really be given a kickstart?
Yeah, I think we would be cautious about mandating any particular structures of the private sector who engaged in the building, but of course it might be a natural consequence of freeing up people to do building and reducing that red tape, that they can therefore achieve economies of scale. An example would be in relation to what are called multi-proofs. So this is where you've got a sufficiently large-scale builder who wants to build, say, 10 or more homes of a similar design or the same design with perhaps a minor variation. So we're looking at encouraging people to do that by making it clearer what they don't need consent for if it's merely a minor variation. So, the devil's in the detail, but if we get these things right, we'll make it easier for people to do their job and to organise themselves in the most efficient way. And of course, the ultimate beneficiary of that isn't just the builders themselves, although that's important, and all those who contribute to the construction pipeline, but of course the consumer, the New Zealand homeowner.
So how soon can we expect to see changes where, the consenting process is streamlined and things are made a lot easier, that you're getting materials in more easily that can be used in building homes?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a process that involves, I hope, a few relatively quick, easy wins, and those are the things we've talked about already as a government. In the government formation, for example, in the New Zealand First National Coalition Agreement, we talked about allowing homes that are relatively small, minor dwellings or granny flats as they might often be, to be built without consent. And so that's an example of something that's already been agreed at a political level that could therefore take place relatively quickly. But there are other bigger questions, more structural questions in terms of building consent authorities and what the right number of those and how do we rationalise councils doing that work currently. There might be more efficient ways of doing it. It might be that they can take work off each other and specialise a bit, for example. So that deserves a bit of a longer look to hear from all the ones, all the people who would be affected by that.
Chris Penk, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
For more content just like this and all the latest business and political news, head over to mbr.co.nz.